Greetings. Welcome to Elm City Lit Fest. I'm Ife Michelle Gardine, founder of Elm City Lit Fest podcast. And I have my coordinator, Shaw McAllister, with me tonight. And in the background and behind the scenes, we are our other coordinator, Emily Mayo, who is sharing our information on Facebook Live. And Shaw's going to introduce our guest this evening.
So I'm really excited. Tonight we have one of my dear sorors, Tangi, known as Tangular A. Irby. She is a Connecticut educator, author, quilter, and descendant of G's Ben quilters. Tangular A. Irby announced the release of her debut children's books, Pearl and Her G's Ben Quilt, and Pearl and Her G's Ben Quilt Coloring, an activity book that went on sale December 25th, 2020. So if you haven't gotten your baby a Christmas gift where you told them that it was in the mail because the post office was the excuse, go ahead and get your baby the coloring book. Learning Advantage Network and Paperback Originals. Pearl and Her G's Ben Quilt is a heartwarming tale told through the eyes of a child who has spent hours watching her grandmother's work her magic with the needle and thread. So tonight we welcome Tangi. Hello. How are you?
Hello. I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you this evening.
The pleasure is all ours.
You didn't name your sorority, honey.
Oh, we are lovely sorors of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated.
Yes, Z5B in the house.
Yes, ma'am. So Tangi, tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired the book.
Well, as you said, I am a Connecticut educator. I've been an educator for some time now. I've worked with students all the way, starting from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade. I currently work as an adjunct at a local university here in Connecticut. So I worked with all ages. I also have spent time in terms of professional development, working with adults, working with teachers who also work with children. So where did the book come from? Well, being an educator, I always loved children's literature. I don't care what it is that I had to teach, what was in the curriculum. I always started with a book, because if you start with a book, your engagement is going to go through the roof. You know, just the impact when you're reading to children and all of a sudden, you know, that child who's sitting in a corner who was restless a minute ago. Well, you start reading the right book and all of a sudden, whatever was in the carpet that had their attention is no longer a part of what they want to do. They want to dig into that book with you. So I've always started with children's literature. And so I always wanted to be an author, but it was just something that a dream that I never ever pursued. Right. So fast forward, you know, I spent a lot of time talking with my aunt who lives in Alabama. She's a G's Ben quilter. And actually my aunt and my uncle, to be quite honest with you. And, you know, you spend time talking to them, and especially my uncle. He's the next one that I'm going to write a book about, because he'll say something and all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I need to write that down. Someone needs to hear that story. You know, everybody has that uncle, right?
Right.
For me, that uncle happens to be married to that aunt. So between the two of them, there's so much content. Oh my goodness, there's just so much. And so when I looked at what was written about G's Ben, there's very little in terms of children's books. And so looking at the impact my aunt has had on my life and looking at the impact that she's having on her grandchildren, I just decided, you know what, let's do it. So it really started from the content. I would talk to her and I would just write things down. And from there, working with an indie publisher, the book was developed, the book was born. And so I'm just overwhelmed with how the book is being received. You know, everyone has a story about a quilt. Everyone, I don't care who you talk to, and it goes beyond color lines, cultures. You know, quilting is just a big piece of who we are and what we've done in the past. And the impact, for example, even talking about, you know, growing up, my parents, for example, growing up in the South, especially in G's Bend, they didn't come from a lot. So if they got ready to move, which a lot of even the young people now, that's what they did. As soon as they got old enough, they moved north. And the idea was they were going to come north and they were going to take care of their family. And they often sent packages back. They sent money back. They did whatever they could to take care of their families, right? And so when they got ready to go, their parents couldn't say, here's $5,000, go forth and be married. Here's $200, go forth and be married. A lot of times they didn't have the money. And the money that they had, they needed to take care of the people who were still there, right? So what they could do was to give them a quilt. And so they came up north and they had their quilts. I think back to growing up, and we would go to visit, and in the girls' room, there were 2 beds that people would sleep in, and there was another what seemed to be a bed in the room that no one slept in. And what it ended up being was just piles and piles and piles of quilts. And I think now, if I could go back and uncover to look at some of those quilts, when I look at the quilts that my grandmothers that they gave me, or I look at the quilts that one of my grandmothers happens to have her quilts published in a quilting book, the Quilters of G's Bend. The Quilts of G's Bend. And when I look at her work, I'm amazed at the beauty of it all. And the fact that there was so much more that we'll never see, because we don't know what happened to all those quilts. Like where are they? So again, quilting has just been a huge part of my family from the very beginning, because it was the way people were able to express themselves. And, was basically taking something from nothing and making it beautiful. So that's the story.
And I could testify to that, because my grandmother, Annie Huckabee, and her sisters came up from North Carolina, and my grandfather's sisters that came up from Macon, Georgia, had a quilting circle. When I was young, as a little girl, I'm like, they would all, it was sister-in-laws, sisters and sisters-in-laws, and they got together and they'd be quilting and asking me to like get the pin something together, or cut pieces of the quilt, or pick up the pins or whatever. And I just thought of it as labor, not realizing as a child back in the 60s, early 70s, that was an art. And right behind me now, I have hanging a quilt which includes some of my grandmother's pieces that were left, that had left from my mother, holding on to a trunk of my grandmother's. And my good friend Ellen Pankey, who's a quilter, put together this quilt from my grandmother's pieces. And I have to say, my aunt that is 101, Sadie Holly, is still alive and kicking.
Yes.
She's not quilting anymore, but she is, but she got some strong ones. And I'm sure your soror, my cousin Tracy,
yes,
has two of them. Because I have a few of my grandmother's quilts around the house. I have like dial clothes. It's such a wonderful tradition.
And all we have when we lose our ancestors, all we have is what they left behind. And, I feel it's our responsibility to continue those traditions, because they're going to be lost. They are absolutely positively going to be lost.
Right. The intimacy of getting a quilt, like a blanket, there's so much that you've touched on as far as what it takes to make a quilt. The women of G's Bend, that's generations, that's history that's passed down. Miss Ife just gave a testimony of she remembers of the quilting circles. And I think it's powerful that it's a sphere. They sat in the circle on purpose. They can all see each other and share things. And this is another situation where we're giving flowers to women who flowers are well overdue, that they deserve what we're talking here and much more. Quilting is a textile art, but isn't given its flowers as well. Folks are using, when I was doing my research for today, a lot of the quilters, they say they like old material. They don't really like new stuff. And they want something that has been worn, that's gone through something, that's been washed or dropped, or they want something with a history, with energy on it. If you think about it, what's made into a quilt, you're really weaving together history. As you spoke about the history of when folks were down south, only a lot of time one person can go. Whether it was the family raising money or churches raising money, that one person who had to go up north, they had the prayer warriors behind them, usually a small bag of food or something, or money that folks got together. But to have a quilt, it's like having a baby blanket. It takes you back home. It takes you to, like, okay, they're with me. And to know that a loved one, usually a grandmother, usually made them, because quilting is it's a woman's creative medium. Men, I was watching something, they said men should be um they should be very respectful that women are allowing them into a quilting space. It's a very intimate setting. um
And lots of men are starting to quilt. You're absolutely right. I'm seeing it more and more, on Instagram. That's where quilters are. So you go and actually I've reached out to a couple and they shared with me that, how they came into wanting to start quilting. So it's very, very interesting. And I'm glad you brought that up because just stay tuned. There's going to be more about that coming in our future in terms of men who are quilting.
Yeah, because I can remember some of the conversations as a little girl. Like I'm just saying, David, you just be like, just shut up and listen. Just like I just was following instructions and listening to them and bringing water to somebody that needed water.
Well, let's be honest. If we're going to really tell the history, and I don't know if you heard this, but it might sound familiar. But that was back in the days when children were seen and not heard. So whatever you heard while they were in that group, your best bet was to act like you didn't hear it. So you didn't repeat it. You didn't ask for clarification. You didn't do anything. You just continued to do what you were doing as if you didn't hear anything.
right, because they're not talking to you. They'll let you know we're not talking to you.
Exactly.
You're
and
supposed to be.
I was gonna say you only needed that reminder once.
Right, because it's mad embarrassing and it's mad harsh. It's like your whole spot is now blown up. It's like, you just got to be invisible. You can't really say too much. It's just you don't want to make no noise because you don't want them to remember that you're there either, and then get sent out because there's nothing else going. All the excitement is in this room.
Exactly.
So I wanted to give a little bit of history of G's Ben. I have some notes here, and then we'll go into a video because I think it's important on this show that you see the quilts, that you really see a video from the women of G's Ben to get perspective, because we're here talking about it. Tangi is a descendant of someone, but we want to give perspective. It's Black History Month as well. Happy Black History Month to all those who are watching. We're rocking and rolling. It is 28 days. We're holding it down and we're honoring our folks, but it's really 365. So let's dive into some G's Ben history. So G's Ben, whose official name is now Boykin, is situated in Wilcox County in West Alabama in the bend of the Alabama River, directly across the river from Camden and southeast of Selma. G's Ben has one road into the community. G's Bend is in the Black Belt region of Alabama. If you know the Bible Belt, this is the Black Belt, an area that draws its name from the soil and the race of the predominant inhabitants. Prior to the infiltration of Europeans, the majority of Native Americans living in Alabama were of the Creek Federation. Joseph G., a large landowner from Halifax County in North Carolina, came to fertile the land in the bend of the river in 1816 to grow cotton. He brought 18 enslaved blacks with him and established a plantation. When he died, he left 47 enslaved blacks and his estate to his two nephews, Sterling and Charles G. A lot of the descendants that you'll see, they usually have the last name Pettiway or G. In 1845, the G brothers sold the plantation to a relative, Mark H. Pettiway. That family name remains predominant in Wilcox County. After emancipation, the free Black population stayed on the plantation and worked as sharecroppers of a tenant farmer. We're getting to the last part of it. During the 1930s, G's Ben saw a considerable shift in their community. A merchant who had given credit to the families in Ben died, and his family collected on debts owed to him in the most vicious way. The families watched as all their food, animals, tools, and seed were taken away. Had it not been for the Red Cross rations distributed to the DeGraff family, not charging rent, the community may have fallen. The DeGraff family sold their land to the federal government, and the Farm Security Administration became involved and set up G's Ben Farms, Incorporated, a pilot project that was a cooperative-based program to help sustain the inhabitants. The government built Roosevelt's houses and sold tracts of land to families on the bend, thus giving the African American population control over the bend. I think it's important to remember this is an isolated area. There's only one way in and really one way out. In 1949, a U.S. post office was established in Gee's Bend, and the name was changed to Boykin, an unwelcome change to the community. Again, in 1962, outsiders forced another change on the community when a dam on the Alabama River flooded thousands of acres of the most fertile land. But Gee's Bend's Orapahoe people got it together, and in 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. was scheduled to visit the Bend. Now, I'll stop here, but when Martin came, he inspired the people to fight for their voting rights. And they stepped up, they followed what he was teaching them. They got invigorated. Their light got sparked. This sparking then caused the government of Gee's Bend at the time to take away the ferry that went there. And the ferry was out of commission from 1951 to, I believe, 2006. So Rev Kev, that's something to simmer on, and Rev Kev is going to take us into a 3-minute video to give some perspective over what we just heard.
Quilting ain't nothing but quilting. They'll say, you know, oh, Marianne, you make some real small stitches, or you keep your line so straight. And I tell them it's a gift. I don't draw any line to try to follow that line. I said, that's too much work. Whatever happened. I said, that's the art in it. And I don't know anything about art. My name is Mary Ann Petway. I'm the manager of the Gee's Bend Quilt Collective. The first show they did in Houston, then they went to New York, to the Whitney. I was told I went to Mobile, the High Museum. I got a chance to go there. China myself, we are mostly traveling, doing workshops, teaching people how to make quilts or our style. But I thank God for that because if they didn't want to learn our style, then she and I won't be, doing that much traveling at all. Oh, it means a lot to me because I started working here in 2006. And since that time, I finished paying for my house. I done bought a car and own one more payment on the van I got out there because of these quilts, because this is my own income. It is helping some of us in this community by making quilts, because a lot of ladies make their quilts at home, then they bring them here to be sold through here. We didn't have some from Japan, Hawaii. We had a lot of different people from here, come to visit with us. When Mom was teaching me, I didn't want to learn how, because see, I was young. I wanted to go play, but I thank God that Mama taught me. She made me. See, we didn't have no beds to lay on, so they had to make quilts for us to lay on the floor and quilts to cover up under. But see, I got the grandboys training them. And I had 2 young girls the other day came and asked me to teach them how to quilt. They say this is a dying art, so as long as I'm able to teach what I can teach, then I'm going to teach it. People tell us we are famous. I don't feel it. I'm still the same as I always been. I try to be more loving and caring and respectful to other people because I want them to treat me with respect, and I, try to respect them.
Wow. History, things like what we need to hold on to, what our children need to know about. And Tangi, it is so strategic and not strategic, but it's so imperative that this book gets out there to everybody's babies. So it's not a lost art, because over the years, like it just like fewer and fewer people learn about these things, and learn about our traditions. And it's really important. My grandmother and my great aunt Sadie, Holly, and their sisters, they did everything by hand, as did these ladies. They didn't really, there wasn't no sewing machines. They were sitting around a big dining room table with doing squares, doing circles, talking about this, that, and the other, and pulling it together. And those quilts hanging in there. I do have a few. Like I said, I still have a few of them. A couple of them on my bed and in storage. So, and my family members as well. It's really
When you think
such a great way.
When you think back, I mean, even back to the origins of it, quilting was done at a time when women didn't have the ability, or we as African Americans didn't have the ability to make decisions, to do what we wanted to do. So quilting back then, to our enslaved ancestors, that was their freedom. They were able to take what they had, right? The only limitation was, what did they have, right? When it came to making quilts, when it came to the designs and how they put things together and what they did, they had absolute freedom. And even talking to my aunt Mary Letha Petway, and some of her quilts are hanging behind me. She often says when she quilts, she feels free. She can do what she wants to do, how she wants to do it. And she uses the word complete. So when she starts off with a project, she doesn't know how big she's going to make it, how small she's going to make it. She just says something within her says, it's done now. This is what I want it to be. And I feel complete. She talks about it being a stress reliever for her. Some people smoke, some people may drink, some people, run a marathon, whatever it is that you do, whatever your thing is. But for her, quilting is her thing. It relieves, no matter what's going on in the rest of the world, she's one with herself when she's quilting. So that's a gift. If you think about it, from way back when, it has carried us through time. We find different ways to express. They didn't know it was art. And now these quilts are hanging in museums all around the country. Just recently, there's been a display in London. When I ask people, I put something on my Instagram page and I asked people to tell me your Gee's Bend story. And I was absolutely amazed with some of the things that came back. I had a college student, who was, when she was in college, she was going for art. And she said that she wanted to give up. And she said she heard that story and she became reinvigorated and wanted to do it more so. She wanted to finish her program. There are people who were talking about the fairy, for example, because it's one of few fairies like that, when they were doing some research about fairies. So people from all over, they talk about going and learning how to quilt with the women in Gee's Bend. So it's just amazing the number of people who have a story, and the fact that, this small town is impacting the world in terms of people saying, they didn't go to college, they didn't go to art school, and their quilts are being held up against some of the most famous artists that we've all heard of, right? So it's an honor and it's a joy. And again, it's something that we just don't want to die out. We want the young people to start picking it up. My friends are contacting me saying, my daughter wants a Gee's Bend quilt now, or my daughter wants to learn how to quilt. Now I've showed my daughter the quilt that I have, and they see the value in it now that it's in print and in a book. So that really is the message that I'm trying to convey. It's all about, I'm bridging gaps through storytelling, bridging generational gaps through storytelling.
Yeah, and it's really important. I know I keep going back to it, but my cousins and I, the quilts that we have from our grandmothers are like hugs. When my daughter was born, my grandmother made a quilt for my baby. And we still hold on to that. And it's tradition. Like we want to pass them on. We want to hold on to them. And even like the quilts that my friends have made, I have a few hanging around my house, hanging on the wall, because I don't want to mess some of them up.
They're art. It's art. That's what you do with artwork, right? You hang it. It's to be revered, not to necessarily, I remember someone telling me when I told them that I was a descendant of Gee's Bend. The first thing she did, she stopped doing what she was doing. She looked at me and said, "Take that quilt off of your bed." Okay. And I was like, okay.
because it was a hug. It's like a hug. It's like part of your family.
Exactly,
A lot of the
exactly.
women in my research, I found that they said these are their heirlooms for their descendants. They don't have a lot of money to give, and they don't have anything too much materialistic, but they have this quilt that is like a rite of passage. That
It
if your
is.
grandma made you a baby blanket, or one of your aunts made you a quilt, or baby clothes, or
You hold on
baby
to
shoes,
it.
or something of that nature. And I'm glad you spoke about how the ancestors have been doing this since they were brought over. And this is one of the first few forms of protest art that Black people were able to use, because you figure your life is so controlled. Every aspect of your day, every being, someone's telling you what to do. It's oppressed. You're being oppressed
Mhm,
constantly and
mhm.
everything. But through this one avenue, you're able to be free. You're able to drift. You're able to tap into your intuition and have your intuition tell you when you're done.
It allowed you to have your humanity in a society that deemed you less than human, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really makes you wonder, because like why does it necessarily have to be this way? I think we should talk about these people lost their fairy because they wanted to vote.
Mhm.
They I don't understand how one can justify that. You're isolating me, you're keeping me from nowhere. There's no store here. All they have is that post office. They're growing the food that they eat there on this island, and it's like these systems of oppression. And then to even talk about the Creek Federation of the Native folks who were there, where's their story? Were they a part of the natives who had to go on the Trail of Tears? Like what when
What shouldn't be lost here, and everything that happens in history, there's something in our present day that we can make connections to, right? So what shouldn't be lost is the power of a group of people when they've decided what it is that they want to do and that they want their rights. So when a group of people get together, change happens. So that was recognized. That's what happened with the ferry. A change was going to happen if people mobilized and when they were able to actually go out and vote. So I'm just going to leave it like that, and you just think about what recently happened right here in the United States, right? Change happens. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I'm not saying bad, good, indifferent. I'm just saying change happens when people know their power and they do it. Right? They get together for a common good. So whether it's a group of people who are getting together to quilt, whether it's a group of people who are getting together to go vote, regardless of what it is. So to me, that's what that speaks to. That's why they lost the ferry. And you know, that trip, I believe at the time, because everything is different depending on the time and the horsepower, I'll put it that way. But the amount of time it took to get across the Camden on that ferry was much shorter than hopping in a car and driving on land. And most people back then, how many people had a car?
Right.
Right?
And we're here to talk about this book. So if you can, Tangi, just like give us a little snippet. Read some pages. Read from some pages. Start it off. Give people teasers, because the link, we put the link on our page. But she also has a link that you can buy the book, y'all. Buy the book.
And that's for autograph copies for the book set. But if you want the book, it's at Amazon, etc. So you can just find it online. All right. So first, I'll just say that both of my grandmothers actually were from Gee's Bend. So we have Pearl Kennedy Petway and Jency Lee Irby. So my maternal grandmother was Pearly, and so that's where Pearl comes from. Okay. So let's get into the story. I'm just going to give you a little bit of it. All right. So on a lazy Sunday afternoon, Pearl sat playing in the living room with her friends, Sally and Ella, as the aroma of homemade biscuits, smothered chicken, rice, collard greens from the garden, and Grandma's famous tea cakes filled the house. "Wow, that quilt is amazing," Sally said. "My mom has quilts like that at our house." "Grandma told me I come from a long line of Gee's Bend quilters whose quilts have been displayed in galleries and museums all over," Pearl proudly boasted. "When I get older, I'm going to make quilts too, and one of my quilts will hang over there one day." Pearl pointed to the empty space where she intended to display her work. That's pretty neat. But what are G's Bend quilts? I've never heard of that before, Sally asked, wide-eyed. Pearl sat up straight with confidence. Back when my grandma was younger, the house she lived in did not have any heat, so she and her siblings used quilts to keep warm during winter. The families who lived in G's Bend, Alabama, were very large. Some had 10 or more children, so they needed lots of quilts. They would tear up old clothing to use for fabric. The women would move from house to house, quilting during the evening. During the day, many of them worked at the Freedom Quilting Bee. They would use sewing machines to piece together the tops, but they quilted them together by hand. Sally and Ella listened in amazement, surprised that their playdate had turned into a fantastic lesson about Pearl's family history. And I am going to stop right there. You'll have to pick up the book to hear the rest of the story. But what I do want to share is, and thank you, you're holding up the cover of the book, but the quilt that Pearl is holding on the cover of the book is actually a quilt that my maternal grandmother made probably 30 or 40 years ago. And you also talked about baby quilts. So if you look in the book, there are 2 baby quilts. This one was given to me.
Got this one.
Right. And then on the back, there's a green and blue one that was given to my brother. So we both have quilts that were given to us when we came into the world. And then the other thing that I will share, because I haven't seen these too often, but you'll see here, there are frogs. So my grandmother made those. For a while. They were making stuffed animals.
Wow.
So we also have stuffed animals, and there I have a chicken and something else that my grandmother made. But yeah, so it was a way of, again, honoring what my grandparents did and showing the world that, that there are many descendants of G's Bend throughout the world. The other thing that I'll add is that a few years ago, for example, the play, there's been a play, G's Bend, that's traveled across the world. And I didn't know that the play was coming until a coworker, actually my boss, who knew I had ties to G's Bend, he came to me and told me that the play was in town. And he was like, I want you to go with my family. So I went with them. So what's interesting to me is a lot of times these things like this are happening. Shows are coming, there's a play, and there are descendants right there in these cities and towns, and we never know about it. So I want people to know that we're out here and we want to go see the quilts too. Maybe 2 years ago, a show came to Lehman College in the Bronx. And so a group of us, there probably was about 8 or 9 of us, we were able to go, and my mom was with us then. So we were able to go and look at the names, and she was able to tell us who people were. So it's a great experience for our families as well as for people who may not know about the quilts.
Wow. And I am remiss because I believe in the 80s, my aunts and my grandmothers were a part of a quilting show here in New Haven that I believe the Arts Council put together. And it just came to me like I should have got my research on, because somewhere in my world I still have the newspaper article where their quilts were featured in an exhibit downtown at the Arts Council, and it was one of the highlights of their lives. But they, among many other things, but my aunt Sadie Sue again, Tracy, holla at Tracy for her nana. She's one of the last quilters in our family. She's last in our family alive, 101, hanging in there. God bless her.
Yes.
And they were, it was something that they sat around bonding.
Mm-hmm.
There was it was a real bonding time. And when I reflect on just listening to them and fetching whatever they needed me to fetch, or cutting, or doing
the needles,
or getting the needles out of the shag carpet. when I reflect on that, it was such a sisterhood time. And like I said, my grandmother and her sisters were from Fayetteville, North Carolina, and then my grandfather's sisters, my aunt Sadie, and then we're from Macon, Georgia. But they had a common thing in the quilting, and they came together around the quilting with in the summertime with the lemonade, the sweetest lemonade and iced tea and snacking, but making sure they didn't get anything on it. Or what you got? What? Oh, let me use a piece of that. Um, old dresses, things that people were going to throw away, or something got torn, an old curtain, like you said, like it was pieces of things, and it's so historic, and it's so much a part of our tradition. It was at Eli Whitney. Thank you, Tracy. Shout out to Tracy. It was at the Eli Whitney Museum that they had an exhibit of quilts, and yes, we'll probably we'll find the pictures, Tracy, if you have any.
Yeah, and I know
Post them and tag the Lit Fest. If I can find mine, I will. And I think my cousin Jaren Goodson is also listening. And her and my Auntie Lane, they may have the newspaper article as well. I am remiss because I didn't mention that.
Yeah, I have a collection as well. At one point, they even did postal stamps with G's Ben quilts on them. Do you remember? I have them somewhere. I think they're in the other room, but yes, there were postage stamps that were done. And, and I also have to mention that there's a group of women right here in Bridgeport who are still quilting, who are descendants of G's Ben. Yes. And it was interesting. There's a group, and you mentioned Petway. So there are a lot of Petways right here in the city of Bridgeport. So we're here, and they are still quilting, and they're passing it down. We recently got together because there's an article that's going to be written. It's going to be on the Bridgeport Public Library page. Yes. And so we all brought one or two quilts, and so they were able to have their pictures, their quilts photographed. And so one of the stories that was told was about a great grandmother's dress that was used as the backing of that quilt. And like I said, there's still, those things are still here. That's what we have left to pass on to our children. And so the thing about it is, if we don't teach them the value of it, our children are going to get these things and just think that they're just that, things. And you hear people say all the time, well, I'm living a minimalist life. I don't want all that stuff in my house. Well, there's a difference between stuff and then things that have been passed on from one generation to the next. And if we don't tell them and teach them the difference, those things that we hold, that hold value, they're just going to be discarded. And so we have to make sure that they know and that they understand. The other thing for me on a personal note that I'm really interested in is, we talked about, we have these quilts that have been passed down, and, we don't want to put them on our bed. We want to try to preserve them. So one of the questions that I'm trying to get an answer for is, how do we preserve these quilts? Because I do know that there's, for example, if they're a little tattered or torn, there's a way that you can preserve them. You don't want to just go and start stitching them up, because by you doing that, if you use thread or material that is today's thread and material, then it changes the date on the quilt. So you can really do some damage to these heirlooms. You don't want to do that. But what I'm finding is that if I go to someone who has some expertise in that area and I ask those questions, I typically get, oh no, I don't think this person they probably won't be able to help you, but you can try. But if you want to sell your quilt, I'm your person. So people are more than willing to help you if you want to sell it. And if you know how it works, if you find someone who's going to help you sell your quilt, they're going to get a huge commission, right? I don't want to sell my quilt. I want to keep my quilt. The majority of us want to pass them down to the next generation. But how do we do that in a way that, again, preserves it so that it can last longer? So I'm hoping that maybe there's someone, listening or watching that will be able to answer that.
Right. I think our Lit Fest network, and I think we should put that call out there, because it kind of speaks to different jobs in art. If seeing textile and quilting as an art, there's a preservation to it. There's a maintenance, as paintings need to be maintained, photography needs to be maintained. You just said that if someone stitches anything on, it changes the date.
Yes. That's what was.
Therefore, it then changes the value of it. As we think about collecting art, folks may already have art in their home. Whoever you were talking to was more than willing to help you make a transaction on it. They know those resources. They know the resources to help you preserve it, but they know that there's a value in it. And if we're able to pass, this is going on in Bridgeport. I had no idea. I don't think anyone, if you're not in Bridgeport in the loop on these things, knew that descendants are there, that this work is going on. Folks are at home with nothing to do. Folks could be quilting.
Exactly. And then we're all over. There is, I just think of, there's family. We're in Boston, we're in Mass, we're in New York. We're all over. We're in Colorado, all over.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to repeat the fact.
Because if you don't know where you've been, it's hard to know where you're going. We don't know where we're going because we don't know where we've been. As you spoke about, you could give a young person a quilt right now. It's like, okay, well, I got another blanket. Thank you. I appreciate it. But not knowing that this is all handmade. Something that's handmade always is valued more because it's made with that personal touch. If someone wanted to get into quilting, what would they need? Is it a difficult process? Do they have most of the things in their house? What does that look like?
Well, what I will tell you is that, and again, Instagram is where a lot of quilters live. I just saw earlier today that there's a woman who actually is teaching lessons virtually. Right. So you can look online and find these resources. They are absolutely there. For me, I learned obviously we weren't in a pandemic. So it was a situation where I had been going to work and telling someone that I wanted to quilt, and she had enough. So she brought me some fabric, put it on my desk and said, I'll see you after school. And so that was how I learned how to quilt. So, and did I not say that, telling the G-Spin story, we didn't have a lot. So we used what we had in our house. So you have a needle and thread and you have some old clothes. I think you have enough to get started. It's just a matter of finding someone who might be able to help you a little bit along the way. But again, you can YouTube anything. You can use absolutely anything. So in this environment, there is nothing. If you say that there's something that you want to learn how to do and you're not acting on it, that is on you. Nobody else. It is on you. Because even with how I came into, like I said, I knew I wanted to be an author. I wanted to write a book. And how it started for me was a resource online. Facebook, they know what you're doing. They track you. So something popped up in my feed about if you want to self-publish a book, come to a master class. It's free. All right. I was quarantined. I was at home. Why not? So I went in, and when I tell you this, she blew my mind. So talk about an hour's worth of time that was worth it. She had a module on if you want to create a journal. There was a module on if you wanted to do a children's book. She had modules for everything, hours and hours and hours of real content. So that was how I got started. So I don't care what it is that you want to learn how to do. Go to Facebook, there's a resource there. If nothing else, it will get you started. I don't care what you do. There's a language for it. I learned the language. I learned the business behind it. And this was all free.
And we have a lot of comments. If we go in our Facebook feed, we have recommendations on how to pack them to get less sun.
Awesome.
And then and that's from Lisa McDowell. And Lisa Jackson invited someone, Brenda Castell, a quilting enthusiast, to join. Babs Rawls Ivy said, rich conversation. Thank you for listening, Babs. And Colleen Coleman. The curators at the Museum of Modern Art finally recognized the G-Spin quilters, placing them alongside recognized abstract expression art.
Yes.
Okay.
Give flowers where flowers are due and recognize the value of it. I'm going through a lot right now. Because knowing that all this history is right here in Connecticut,
right here,
a lot about
it's right here. And then and another thing, I have to give credit where credit is due. So, some of this also came out of when I go back to the ladies right here in Bridgeport. They did a quilt show. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago at one of the local churches. And, you know, I went, and when I got in there were quilts everywhere. There were quilts on the floor. There were quilts on the tables. There were quilts on the wall. They had no more space. There were quilts everywhere. And I tell this joke often, but it's the truth. If someone in my family goes to college, and I have a lot of cousins that went to college, so that's not what I'm trying to say. But if you went to college, there's a belief that you can do anything. The refrigerator breaks down. Call her. She went to college. She has a degree. She can do it, right? So I don't care what it is. So when they said that they wanted a place to show their quilts, that was a job that they gave me and another young woman. We want to be able to show our quilts. But what I found was that it was hard to prove that we were who we were, right? And so I also know that they said, well, look, if you want to be an expert, deemed an expert at anything, you need to write a book. And so I still want to do it. I'm going to do something for adults, but they really pushed me to get this stuff in writing. And another push behind it is I want to give them an opportunity to have that show, to show their quilts somewhere. Right. So again, that's what's next for us. That is what's next. That was a driver behind a lot of this, that, you know, the work needs to be recognized, and it was not being recognized. And often it's not I want to make sure that my people benefit from all of the hard work that they've been doing. My grandmothers, our great grandmothers worked too hard. This opportunity wasn't given to them. We have this opportunity. So we need to be their voices. We need to do what they would have done if they lived in this day, at this time, at this moment, to be able to make these things happen. I just feel it's our responsibility, along with not letting this art die out.
It
Absolutely. Is. And having a children's book to put it in the hands of the babies, to put it in the children's minds, builds legacy. Mm-hmm. And this is just so key. I love the way we're starting our podcast for Black History Month, with some history of our women, some traditions of our families. We have to maintain our legacy in this country. It's so crucial.
Mm-hmm. It is our duty. We have to. It's our duty we have to our ancestors, right? What our ancestors have gone through, none of us could imagine. We know the hardships of what folks had to go through slavery, what folks had to go through Jim Crow, what folks had to do when they got to the North, and they finally found like a sense of peace. What we go through every day, this same oppression, you know. But with that, we still have to carry the baton. We have to make sure that these traditions of quilting, things like cooking, things like sewing. A lot of folks' grandmother tell you they were seamstresses, or that they are these phenomenal bakers that no one else is going to hold our history but us. If we don't pass it along, the importance of you starting out with the children's book is that you have to start with the beginning. What's next? These children, now they have, even if they don't look at it or if they don't remember it, they were exposed to. You never know what sticks in someone's mind. They may remember the quilt, they may remember G's Ben, they may remember all of it, but that one exposure could spark something down the line when they get to elementary school or college. They see a quilt and it's like, yo, I remember that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as we celebrate Black History Month and we, honor our elders and those who have come before us and those who are cultivating now, everyone on this call, behind the scenes right here, those in the comments, shout out to Sora Lisa for giving the tips. Like, we've called on our network. Mm-hmm. Sora Tangi just said that there's a population of quilters and those of G's Ben who want to continue the work, who want to keep the history going. That's a call out. I don't know how y'all do. When you put a call out in the hood, you respond. You're looking for an answer. So we're here putting that call out. Like, if you are interested in quilting, if you are a Pettyway or a G or someone who is interested in this to any degree, reach out, tap in, because why not? And as Tangi said before, everything's on the internet. There really is no excuse. You don't have to go to the library. You don't need an expert or a private class. Like, you have to self-teach yourself. Malcolm X was self-taught. A lot of the most wonderful, phenomenal people you look up to are self-taught. You have to plant your own seed, and then everything else will come to you.
My biggest regret is that I did not sit at the feet of my grandmothers to learn to quilt the way that they quilt. And when I think too, I have two beautiful nieces, Cameron and Camille. I don't know if they're watching and listening, but two beautiful nieces. And when I think about all the experiences that I had when I would go back, they're not going to have those experiences. And so I don't want, when they're ready, and one of them has already expressed the desire to want to learn to quilt, but I want them to have a place to go back and say, oh, I wasn't interested then, but now I am. So you know what? They can pick up the book, right? And they can find the information here. So the regrets that I have, I don't want them to have. And down to, my mother was the one who made the tea cakes. So anyone, if you're a church usher in Bridgeport, they may not remember my mother's name. They may not remember anything else, but they know her tea cakes. They'll show up and say, "Where the tea cake lady, is she here?" But that's in a book. And people on Instagram, I had someone reach out to me today saying that sparked a memory for them. So, I tried to, as much as possible, to incorporate some of those little things that will make someone think about their own stories. Yes, this is my story. This is our G's, but this is our story. But you might not have the G's been story. But what is your story? Start trying to talk to your kids about those stories. Start writing it down. They may not be interested today, but there will come a time when they say, oh, I wish. People talk about that apple pie that their grandmother used to make, or I think about my mom's sweet potato pie. My joke was, well, if I don't like it, I don't need to know how to make it, right? But missing the point that now that my mother is gone, there's somebody else that loved her sweet potato pie. If I knew how to make it, I could make it for them, and that will help them remember something about my mom that's no longer here anymore, right? But they always say, you live and you learn. So there's so many lessons that we've learned, our ancestors have learned. Let's share those stories now, so there's some things you don't have to keep learning generation after generation. It'll just be there, right? You'll just know. So that was really the motivation and a lot of the motivation behind the book and the purpose.
Well, Tangi, for me, I'm we are Elm City Lit Fest is so grateful that you kicked off our Black History Month celebratory podcast, and just evoked so many memories from my childhood. Because again, I like you, I regret that at the time when I was sitting not at the table, around the table.
near the table,
that my grandmother had a huge dining room table, and everybody would come with their little bag and their stuff and pull out their things and start quilting. Somebody be on the couch. I was just that, Shell, just go get that. Shell, just go get this. I shut up, like was mentioned earlier. There was a time where I had to be quiet, but I regret that I thought it was labor. As a little girl, and then I've like had, my grandmother has so many trunks and like places stored with quilts in them. I'm like, as I find them, I'm bringing memories come back, and like I said, they're like a hug. So I appreciate you writing this book to keep the tradition going, to have the conversations, to like globally, because sometimes it's a little network of things that people don't know about. We have put the link to Pearl's quilt on our Facebook page. Please click on it. Please buy the book. Look up quilting. Support Black art. Elm City Lit Fest is a celebration of the African diaspora, of literature, literary artists, and literature and literary artists of the African diaspora. We have got to keep our legacy in this land going.
Thank you, Tangi, for bringing this history to the forefront and for sharing your family's history. I think folks got to give that credit. Like, this is intimate, like you're sharing something of your world, of your folks, that you put in this book for us. And thank you for giving flowers to these women and giving flowers to the art of quilting. I hope that this has inspired folks to get interested in it and to give it its flowers. Like, there's a whole bunch of exhibitions we see and art shows and things like that. Like, make it well-rounded, include everything. Textile art is art.
Exactly. And thank you for this space. I'm honored to have shared the space and to be the kickoff for you this evening. And I think the people in the comments, I can't see anything because I am afraid I'm going to end the meeting if I click anything else. StreamYard is new to me.
That's all good. Again, we appreciate you. Everybody look that up. We also want to say to everybody in our last few minutes, Elm City Lit Fest is hosting Midnight Noir for Valentine's Day. On Valentine's Eve, Saturday, February 13th. You can register on Eventbrite. This will not be a podcast. It's a private Zoom. It's called Midnight Noir. We bring your love poetry. Read a favorite love poem that you know about. But it's about love, because one of the things we feel is that love keeps us going. It recharges us. We have so many things as African American people in this world to fight for, to maintain our legacies, all that. But we want to promote some love this year, and especially 2021 pandemic, elections, blah stuff. Let's celebrate some love. You could and because it's a Zoom, what stays in that room will be in that room.
It's a safe space. It's getting real sensual on Saturday. Bring your fit, your candles, your wine. If you got a fireplace, this would be the time to light it. Background, if you got a secret poem you got on your phone, or you got that love poetry and journal back in the back, and you never thought you'd give it out to the people, this could be that time for you. It won't be recorded. Wear your fit, give us razzle dazzle, but keep it cute. No, please don't.
If you love yourself, love your partner, whoever you're with, bring your cocktail, your mocktail, however you want. But please, and it's free. It's free, and it's Zoom. We will not broadcast any of this.
You can register through Eventbrite, which we'll have posted. And if you're interested in participating, there'll be an open mic portion. But if you want to sign up to get on the roster ahead of time, we have a Google form that we will post in our Facebook. Please sign up. Like, come kick it. It's from 11 to 1. Y'all be up. Don't be playing sleep now. You be up.
It ain't like you could go out for dinner. Like, come on now. Take a nap. If for those of you don't want to stay up late, take a nap. Wake up at like 10:30, log in, join us. I'm gonna have on something. I'm gonna be Valentine. I'm gonna be Valentine. I ain't gonna be Frederick to Hollywood, but I'll be Valentine. And I will have a cocktail. Now, we went from children's stuff to but it's all about love. Tangi, again, much, much gratitude, sister, and blessings for continued success. Success. And the next book, we'll have you back. Come on.
I will.
Next, when you got that thing out here, come back to Elm City Lit Fest. And Lit Fest, everybody put in their calendars. 2021 will be September 10th and 11th. So more to come.
Can I just say thank you to you both for having me? And I'd be remiss if I did not say thank you to the ladies of the Dove, my Soror Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. I'm looking down at my phone. I can see the chat now. So thank you for watching. And also I see some of my teacher friends from Windsor, Connecticut. Thank you so much for viewing as well.
And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Elm City Lit Fest podcast. Blessings.
Thank you.